fam. Peace and blessing. This is Derric Rau Khu more. And, you know, one of the most common questions I receive from people all over the world is, can I practice Kemetic spirituality because I am fill in the blank? Okay. A lot of people, they think that Kemetic spirituality, like it might be just a cultural thing. They think it's based upon ethnicity. They think it's based upon, it's a regional thing. They think it might be based upon preference or something. So for instance, they'll go ahead and they'll ask, can I practice Kemetic spirituality because, hey, you know, I'm white? Or can I practice Kemetic spirituality over here in Japan? You know, or can I practice Kemetic spirituality because, hey, you know, I was born in Jamaica? Or can I practice Kemetic spirituality over here in South Africa, you know? Or can I practice Kemetic spirituality because this is the life choice that I decided to make? This is how I want to live my life, okay? And every time I go in here and I get these questions, every time I get this question, okay, I always respond in the same way by saying, it depends upon your ancestors if you can practice Kemetic spirituality. And the reason why I say that is because it really does. But a lot of people, whenever I go in here and I say this, not everyone, but a lot of people, they think that I'm being crass. They think that I'm going in here and I'm being short with them, like I don't really want to respond to what they're saying. Or some people even think that I'm holding on to this great Kemetic knowledge and I'm trying my best to cherry pick who can practice Kemetic spirituality or not, because I don't like you, or I like you, and all that kind of stuff. I don't like the life choice you decide to do and all this. And that's not what's going on, fam. Okay? I don't have the time or energy to do that. Okay? So that's not what's going on. Not at all. Okay? So in this video, what I decided to do is go ahead and let's go in a little bit more in detail. Let me go a little bit more in depth and explain why I'm saying it depends upon the ancestors on how or if you're able to practice Kemetic spirituality. Okay? So to begin, we only have one Supreme Being. And the Supreme Being is truly the author and creator of everything. But most of us don't know the Supreme Being. We believe in the Supreme Being, and the reason why we believe in the Supreme Being is because this is what we've been told. It's not until you start delving into spirituality, regardless of what spiritual path you choose to take, it's not until you really start delving into spirituality that you begin to really understand who the Supreme Being is, and you start to understand that it's not just wordplay to say, oh, the Supreme Being is Alpha and Omega. When you really start understanding who the Supreme Being is, and you really start truly understanding the whole idea behind this, behind who the Supreme Being is and what the Supreme Being is, you begin to understand and you begin to see that everything that exists and everything that's come into existence is created by the Supreme Being. And then you eventually come to this idea or this understanding that the Supreme Being is really beyond your conception of reality. Okay? And this is the same dilemma that a lot of us come to. This is the same dilemma that the Kemetic people came across or that they encountered, which was that the Supreme Being is so vast, it is so incomprehensible that there are no words in our vocabulary to actually truly explain who the Supreme Being is to the next person. We can't do it, okay? There's no way in which we can actually go in here and sit down and have a conversation and say, you know, the Supreme Being is this, and people go in here and they get it, okay? It's not going. It can't happen. It won't happen, because that's how vast and how inconceivable the Supreme Being is. So when the ancient Egyptians or the Kemetic people went in here and they encountered this issue, they decided, okay, because we can't describe the Supreme Being this way, let's describe and let's explain the power of the Supreme Being, because the power of the Supreme Being is something that people can see. It's a little bit more conceivable. It's a little bit more, we can conceptualize that. And they call the power of the Supreme Being Ra. And they symbolize Ra by the sun. Now, there's numerous reasons. There's a whole lot of reasons why they went ahead and they decided to symbolize the power of the Supreme Being by the sun, why they call the Ra and symbolize Ra by the sun. I'm not going to go into all of them, but in regards to our conversation here, the reason why they went ahead and they did it is because what they were trying to do, what the Kemetic sages was trying to convey, was that the Supreme Being's power, the power of the Supreme Being, just like the sun, is accessible to us all. Okay? That means that we're all dealing with this. We are all, we all have we all have a degree. We all have the spark of the divine within us. Okay? And it comes through the power of the Supreme Being, which is Ra. That was the whole purpose of doing that. That was the whole reason why they conveyed it, why they symbolized this, and because that was the message they were trying to convey. Okay? So, but it is our interpretation of who the Ra is and how we interact with the Ra that differs. And the reason why our interpretation differs is based upon cultural upbringing. Now, if you were born and raised in the West and you were, you were educated and all that in the West, you know that from birth, we're taught by our family, by our parents, by our family, our friends, our teachers, religious leaders, the movies we watch, the books we read, we're taught that there's this eternal battle going on between the forces of good and the forces of evil, or God versus the devil. Okay? Because of this eternal battle that's going on, there is no in between. You either side with the forces of good or you side with the forces of evil. Okay? Because of this mindset, and because we've been taught this, like I said, from birth, this creates a disconnect. And the disconnect is that somehow, even though we've been taught, even though we've been told, and we believe in the Supreme Being, and we believe that the power of God exists and connects us all, even though we've been told this, even though we know this, even though we believe this, rather, okay, there's a disconnect that exists. And in that disconnect, we feel lonely. In that disconnect, we feel distant from our Creator. In this disconnect, due to this disconnect, because we cannot conceive, or because we cannot see God, and we have not seen God, and all we see are the fingerprints of God, but we see everything that the devil does, we always tend to, we feel that we are siding with the devil. And this right here starts our whole spiritual quest. This is what right here that starts our whole, because of this disconnect, because of the whole good versus evil concept, the God versus the devil concept. Because of that, we have this disconnect. We feel disconnected to our Creator, and we feel this loneliness. And this is what starts our quest on being spiritual. Okay? This is what starts our quest on wanting to be spiritual. And if we do not address that spiritual hunger, that spiritual thirst, if we do not address that within the confines of the three major Western religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, then what happens is we venture outward and we venture into the non-Western traditions and religions. Okay? Now, the thing is, if we're not conscious of this, if we're not conscious that this is what's going on, that this whole disconnect, all of this is all due to the concept of good versus evil. If we're not conscious of that, what ends up happening is that we end up taking that same mentality to other traditions. And it doesn't matter what the tradition is, we'll still approach it from that same disconnect, that same disconnected perspective. The same way in which we went ahead and we view God as being like Zeus, that if I go in here and I do something wrong, God is either going to strike me down with lightning, or God is going to allow evil to go in here and just allow the devil to just ride me. That same idea, that same notion, that same belief, those same understandings based upon that same good versus evil concept, It exists when we go to different other traditions outside non-Western traditions. So you end up seeing people talking about how, well, I went ahead and I did this too, for this deity, and the deity went ahead and they did this. It's the same. It's that same acting out of fear, because that's what the whole good versus evil concept does. It basically instills within us awe, but more so a fear of the divine. Because of that whole Western approach, you can always tell an individual who's functioning from that perspective, from that Western approach, because they'll say, when it gets into the whole Kemetic thing, they'll say, this is how I work with Ra. This is how I work with, or this is how I work with Thoth. This is how I work with Anubis. This is how I work with Isis. It is basically what we refer to as plug and play. Okay. Now, for the record, I'm not knocking anybody who chooses that path or who does things from that perspective, because we've all done this. And then, like I said, if you was born and raised in any Western society and you're dealing with Kemetic spirituality, or you're trying to deal with Kemetic spirituality, you either are dealing with it, or you've either gone through this, or you're still going through it. Okay. Even I've gone through it. Okay. And this is where it stems from. It stems from this whole Western mindset of good versus evil, God versus the devil, that whole compare contrast, there's two opposing forces. Okay. But the Kemetic people never approach their divinities from that perspective. And the reason why is because it is completely different from the Western approach. In Kemetic spirituality, just like many of the non-Western traditions and spiritual systems, there is no good versus the evil. Okay, there is no God versus the devil concept. This is not to say that evil doesn't exist. It's just that it is not pitted. There's not no opposing forces of no eternal battle going on between good versus evil, God versus the devil, so forth and so on. None of that exists. Okay, so in Kemetic spirituality, because there doesn't exist, and everything is basically seen as being connected, you're not going to see that. You're not going to see that whole interplay of this is how you do this. And because you're not going to see this, and because they see everything as being connected, there is not going to be a plug and play system. Okay? So like I said, if you're coming from that Western mindset, you're going to say, oh, okay, well, hey, I like Anubis. I like the fact that he got that dog head. Oh man, he's cool. Oh, he looks so fearsome and everything. I think I'm gonna work with Anubis because I read some stuff on him and he's cool. Yeah, I'm gonna do that. That's how you approach it from the Western perspective. But from the Kemetic perspective, the Kemetic people didn't work with Anubis or Empu, whom they called. They didn't work with them. How the Kemetic people dealt with Empu was, they were like, hey, I've been trying to do this. I've been trying to go ahead and get this accomplished. I've been trying to do this. I keep running into these obstacles. I keep having these problems. And Pooh, can you open the way? If you open the way, I'll go ahead and I'll honor you and I'll give you this, this, and this, and this, and this. And then all of a sudden, mysteriously, magically, non-logically, the way is open. They're avoiding obstacles. And the reason why they approached it from that perspective, they don't work with Empu, they honored Empu. And the reason why they were able to honor Empu is because, from their understanding, if everything is connected and the divinities are all emanations of Nature, or the Supreme Being, then basically, from this perspective, the Supreme Being is basically almost like the CEO of a major corporation. And all the other divinities and all the other spirits, they all play a specific role in the creation of things, which means they're all connected. Okay? You don't go to the CEO if you want something delivered to someone. You go to the person in the mailroom. That's the logic behind that. Now, that perspective comes from the ancestors. It comes from a cultural perspective, okay? And that's what I mean when I'm saying it is the ancestors that determine if you will be able to practice Kemetic spirituality or not. Because it's the ancestors that go ahead and dictated that part. You're not going to find this in a book. What you'll find in the book, if you go ahead and you read, if you read about, read about Anubis, you'll find Anubis is this, Anubis symbolizes this, and that, and the other. You're not going to find a cultural perspective of who Anubis is or who Anpu is, because it hasn't been written down. So where do you get that from? You get it from the ancestors. Okay? You get it from the ancestors. And that's the reason why I said it depends on your ancestors if you want to go ahead and you want to practice Kemetic spirituality. Now, the thing you have to understand about the ancestors is that the ancestors are not just people who just basically they died and they lived before us and they died and then that's it. No. Okay? The ancestors are our parents. They're like good parents. And good parents will go ahead and they do things whether you like it or you don't like it, whether you agree or you disagree. They go ahead and they have certain expectations. So, and the thing about the ancestors is that the ancestors, they know what's going to happen in the future, like good parents. They're going ahead and they're telling you certain things and they have certain expectations because they know, hey, you're going to need this in the future. Okay? So when it comes to dealing with the ancestors are telling us there's a certain way in which you have to live in order for them to access, in order for them to give you and help you with this cultural understanding. Okay? So you might be required by your ancestors to lay off of certain types of foods, to abstain from certain types of foods. You may be required to go ahead and change your lifestyle. You may be required to do certain things like study certain things and engage in certain practices. You may be required to do all these things. But the one thing that has to be understood is that they're not going to tell you something. They're not going to tell you to do something, and they're not going to, suggest and advise that you do something that you're going to totally disagree with. First of all, okay, that's going to be totally out of character. Okay, they're not going. In other words, they're not going to tell you to hurt yourself or hurt other people. That's not what they're going to do. What they're going to tell you to do is something that is going to have something to do with you overcoming your ego. Okay? And you got to understand that. All right? When you're holding on to things the way in which you were brought up and you were raised and all that kind of stuff, when you're holding on to that, that's your ego. Okay? That's your ego holding on to that. When you're going ahead and you're making, I want to go ahead and I want to live my life this way, that's your ego. And the ancestors are saying, you ain't going to go no further unless you go ahead and you do X, Y, Z. Okay? So, it's your ancestors that are going ahead and they are the ones that are responsible for you getting into Kemetic spirituality. Okay? They are the ones that will help you get into this. They are the ones that will help you connect to it. All right? Because the interesting thing, is that I've never met anyone who was born and raised in the non-Western cultures and has a real deep understanding of this. You don't come across them saying, I feel disconnected. I feel disconnected from God. I feel disconnected from, my ancestors and the Creator. And you don't hear that. This is a Western phenomenon. This is a Western illness, okay? And it's due to, again, the whole good versus evil concept, the whole God versus the devil concept, okay? In the Kemetic spirituality, the ancestors, that perspective is, that ancestral perspective is holistic. Okay, that's the reason why you don't see that it exists. Okay, the reason why you're able to connect to the divinities and all, and connect to the ancestors, and you feel that. And people who've gone ahead and they've been and they get involved in any of the African spiritual traditions, they'll tell you there's this connectedness to it. You feel connected to it because of the way in which it is taught. It is the ancestral perspective. It is holistic. There's not two forces pitted towards each other. Okay? There's no two opposing forces. There's no God versus the devil, or God versus, or good versus the evil in that whole narrative. And in order for you to actually be able to get into that, you gotta be initiated into it. And the only ones who can initiate you into it is your ancestors. Okay? Even if you were to go through a formal initiation, you still got to go in here and you got to get a reading, and they'll tell you, oh, it depends upon your ancestors if you're going to go in here and you're going to get into this. Okay? So hopefully that gives you a little bit more understanding of what I mean by that. If you have any more comments, questions, or suggestions, feel free to drop me a line. Until next time, fam, heads.